Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today on enterprise trends in cloud native, specifically focused on how people, companies, enterprises are looking to invest in cloud native in 2022. And we have assembled a very, in my opinion, powerful panel of people who have been in the trenches, have done a lot of work with cloud native, been there, done that, and doing it at scale. So you'll hear from them today. And what I'll do is probably just kick it off real quick. I want to welcome everyone wherever you're from. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Today we have a panel of experts, which we'll go through a bit of introductions in a second. What I'd like to do is quickly announce that there's going to be a AirPod Pro giveaway at the end of this webinar. If you stay throughout the webinar, that is, and I'll announce the winner at the end. So stay through it. This is going to be a fun conversation. With that, let me kick off. Maybe just do a quick round of introductions of the panelists here, starting with Roy. Maybe just a few seconds, who you are, a little bit of your background. I'm pretty sure a lot of people already know. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Roy.
excellent. Well, thank you, Kamesh, and glad to be here. Hi, I'm Roy Cho. I'm founder and principal at EbitThink. We are a research and advisory service focused on infrastructure technologies. And so we've been working with infrastructure vendors for many years now across cloud native infrastructure, virtualized networking, and as well the move to containers. We've been tracking it for many years, which is how I got to know Platform 9 and some of the founders over many years. We've been keeping in touch, and so I'm glad to see that they're breaking out and getting a lot of momentum. So very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. Janaki?
Hello, everyone. My name is Janaki Ram, based out of Hyderabad in India. I'm an independent analyst, advisor, CNCF ambassador, certified on Kubernetes. I've been working on containers and Kubernetes for about 5-6 years now. Pretty thrilled to be a part of this panel. Looking forward to a very interesting set of discussions.
Thank you, Janaki. We have Ravi.
Hi, my name is Ravi Ravichandran. I've been in the industry for over 20 plus years, worked at large companies and startups, currently running the digital transformation at Juniper Networks. I came as a CTO from GE Digital from IIoT experience.
Yeah, you are with Juniper right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Welcome, Ravi. Hendrik.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hendrik Blix. I'm a principal product manager at Intuit, which I think most of you have heard of. We're just getting into tax peak now, so we're getting really busy. So I'm part of the platform team here. So we've done a journey similar to what many of you are looking to do. We've migrated from massive data centers to 15,000 nodes running in public cloud. So I'm part of the platform team that was responsible for building that platform that runs all that and serves our roughly 5,000 developers. So I'm mostly focused around things like GitOps and Argo, part of that platform.
Terrific, Hendrik. Last but not the least, we have our own Madhura Maskaski from Platform 9. Madhura?
Hey folks, I'm Madhura Maskaski, co-founder and head of product at Platform 9. Spent several years in the industry prior to that, primarily at VMware. At Platform 9, I love to engage with all of our engineering and product and field, etc. teams to do everything Kubernetes. So looking forward to this conversation.
Terrific. Thanks, everyone. Welcome again to the panel. Why don't I do a quick review of how this all started. In the middle of December, we decided to do a survey of the marketplace to see how companies and enterprises are thinking about cloud native and what their investment plans are, how they are going to containerize their stacks, and what are they doing about cloud native in general in 2022. So we did a survey, started in December 15th, ran it through January 9th, and we were thrilled at the response. We got 526 plus responses. And we followed that up with a series of one-on-one interviews to kind of understand some of the nuances behind the data. So that report is now live, and part of the discussion today will focus on some of the findings. So let me quickly show you what the report looks like. So here's the report. It'll be available to you right after this webinar for download. And we've kind of focused on a number of different things, right? What are the concerns around cloud native? Concerns about vendor lock-in. How are they addressing the distributed infrastructure that's going on with multiple clouds, with edge, with on-prem? Kubernetes, of course, has become kind of almost the de facto standard for containerization. What kind of Kubernetes deployments are happening out there? What kind of infrastructure deployments are happening out there? How are people staffing up? What are the priorities in their staffing? And then what are the types of containerization initiatives they are undertaking, right? And then some of them are doing DIY, some of them are using managed services. What are the differences between those and how should you think about it? And more importantly, I'll show you real quick some of the demographics here. So we have a pretty good representation across large companies, 10 billion, 1 to 5, 10 billion, 5, up to a billion, and a lot of representation for smaller and mid-sized companies as well. So I was looking at the data, and these are 450 distinct companies across 85 industries. So it's a very broad, very diversified sample. So if you see trends that are common across these, you're sure that there's something to that data, right? And then, of course, you have to kind of go deeper into what that means for you as you approach and plan for your 2022 initiatives. And looking at the job titles too, very diversified. Lots of architects, cloud architects, lot for software developers, DevOps engineers. So I did a quick analysis of how this breaks out. About 30% are architects, about 30% are executives and decision makers, C-level people, managers, VPs, etc., and the rest are all DevOps practitioners and DevOps engineers. So very good representation here as well. So overall, the data is very representative of how people are thinking about things in 2022. So what we'll do today is kind of have Roy kind of moderate the panel. We will cover some key topics here. Some of them have to do with this idea of distributed infrastructure. So if you go here, you'd see that everything is getting distributed across single public clouds, 2 or more public clouds, which people call multi-cloud, which will be an interesting topic of discussion. On-premise is not going away, it's still there. Edge is really growing very fast. I was surprised to see 14% edge in this sample. So to us, this is a highly distributed infrastructure. And the more distributed it is, the more siloed it becomes. And the more siloed it becomes, the more operational overhead there is. There's less utilization. So how do you deal with all of these challenges, right? So let's dive into these topics. As far as questions, feel free to ask them along the way. We'll have 15 minutes in the end. And of course, there's that air part. Don't forget about that, okay? With that, I'm going to hand it over to Roy. Let's jump into the conversation here. Roy?
All right, thank you, Kamesh, and thank you, audience, for being with us today. I see some questions already starting to come in. Please go ahead and do that, and I think we have some questions around the giveaways, but we'll address that as well. I think what I would like to say is I think one of the things that struck me when Kamesh contacted me, and we've obviously been talking to Platform 9 for quite a while now, is Roy, I have this result of the survey. I'm like, let's take a quick look, and I was very impressed at the scale of the survey. And more importantly, at the level of detail that I think the survey is able to provide with regard to segregating practitioners that have just started with containers and some of those who have been running it for some time, those with small scale deployments and those with large scale deployments, executives, and the actual technologists involved in it. And so with that level of detail in the data is definitely very helpful to delve in and see some of the trends that we're seeing. Now that we're quite a few years into container deployments, as Johnny said, he's been working at it for some time now, and we actually have some customers that have been deploying relatively large deployments for many years. And so the data, I think, points to some very interesting trends. So we're going to start with the topic as Kamesh alluded to, distributed clouds, right? It's not just a single cloud. It's not even just multiple public clouds, but it's also on premises and even to the edge. And as we looked at the data, and if you download a copy, if you haven't, again, you'll see me saying that a couple of times because I really think it's worth your time. The data shows, public cloud deployments with 30%, hybrid 32%, edge, surprisingly 16%, on premises 12%, and multi-clouds 10%. So I think the question here really is what's really driving this distributed nature of cloud computing, And what are the real issues that customers are facing as they grapple with building and operating this distributed infrastructure? It's not one location, it's multiple locations, very often with diverse platforms, right? And how does CI and CD automation sort of, come in, right? How does CI/CD automation come in to create some kind of consistency across this distributed cloud world, right? How do you manage it across, these distributed clouds? So maybe Henrik, you've worked with open source, you work with container technologies for multiple years now. What's your observations? What are you seeing? Do you agree what the survey is showing in your experience, and what can you share?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot to unpack there. So let me try and be brief. I think we can do a whole session just on that question alone. But I think one of the big drivers that I've seen is simply just friction. So multi-cloud is more of an evolution for many. It's not a lift and shift, and they might have a strategy where new workloads land on public cloud and they keep the old workloads on-prem or maybe in a different cloud. So a multi-cloud might not even really be it just happens because of the evolution of their platform, and it's just cost prohibitive to rewrite legacy applications and things like. It's just easier to just slowly let it fade away and then just slowly move over. So I think for many, multi-cloud might not be an explicit strategy. It's just a natural part of the evolution. And I think one of the struggles that we have had at Intuit, I mean, we've already done most of that journey. Like I said, we've already moved thousands of applications into public cloud. But one thing that we've seen, and that I know that others have seen, is just how do you shield your users and applications from the differences in those environments? I think that some of that was reflected in the survey too. Like, even though they're public clouds, they're all slightly different. So how do you abstract that away from the users and from applications? So if you have to move something, how do you avoid having to rewrite your application, retrain your users and all that, right? So we've seen a lot of interest both on the open source side in projects like Crossplane and Kubevela that can abstract some of the infrastructure away. Kubevela has a really interesting open application model where they have a unified API, so you can change things underneath and the application still doesn't have to change, right? So I think those are some really interesting things that are gaining a lot of traction. And then lastly, I think using things like GitOps and CI/CD tool. I'm slightly biased working on the Argo project, but using things like GitOps.
I guess that's going to come up at some point. I was just waiting. Yeah, sorry.
But fully objectively, I mean, Argo came out of a need we had of Intuit. I mean, Intuit started the Argo project because there was a need that we needed to fulfill in our platform journey. So I think using tools like GitOps, using tools like Argo CD that can inherently support multi-cluster, multi-cloud, I think will take some of that pain away. But the bigger question is then at the end, like, can your application handle it, right? And I think that's where a lot of people are going to struggle more than with just the infrastructure.
Yeah, sure, that's fair. I'm going to basically keep that point a little bit. We're going to actually go into a lot more detail around strategies, for abstraction across distributed infrastructure. But I want to maybe sort of tee off a couple of things that you said, right? Which is that a lot of companies end up with multi-cloud because it sort of fell into it just by evolution of application development. And in certain cases, they're not actively trying to go after multiple cloud, but it just happened to be that. And I know that in our work with some of the companies, it's not, when we say multi-cloud, it's actually not multiple cloud as like a CIO strategy or multi-cloud. It's actually this department decided that they like Microsoft Azure better because they started with it, or they had some free credits. This department decided that they like GCP, for various reasons. Or this department started using S3 and then they sort of fell into it, or they decided to build with RDS and they dropped into AWS, and then you end up in multi-cloud all of a sudden, right? And I wanted to see if the other panelists have had similar experiences or have seen similar examples with other companies and sort of falling into multi-cloud, either sort of accidentally or maybe as part of a deliberate strategy. This distributed cloud, right? How, I guess it's the reality, but how do we get here? So any other panelists want to jump in here? Johnny, Ravi, Madhura?
I guess the multi-cloud is a necessity, right? So because the companies scale with new businesses, new products, and they also expand to make those products available in multiple clouds, they have to have their products run in multiple clouds.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to make sure they're agnostic to the underlying infrastructure, right? That's one. Two, large companies by tradition, probably, they have a lot of legacy, right?
Yep.
And they are also migrating to cloud, and they start with one, and then they have preferred partners over time. So all these things evolves over time, and that's how the new set of the legacy gets created, correct? So that's a challenge, and I think the Kubernetes and solves that problem really well because it's built for being agnostic to the underlying infrastructure, and that's what makes it's the best. You get Kubernetes, you get agnosticism along with clustering. So you have software high availability built into it. At the same time, you're now able to crisscross across multiple clouds, on-prem, off-prem, hybrid. It basically makes that particular software layer really agnostic and strong and powerful for you to integrate.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. The containers as an abstraction is a very powerful abstraction. And we're, in and of itself, right? That's a really powerful abstraction. Now, certainly there are operational aspects of it and some of the other elements, and as well there are the services that you may come to depend on, which are, regardless of whether you container a VM or other solutions, you may end up tying into a cloud-based service, and then you have to figure that part out, right? But I think what I'm hearing now is that essentially there are a couple of reasons why we got here. One is just by evolution of the company picking different clouds at different times with different applications. There are certain situations where different departments and different companies decide to go after different clouds for various, business reasons or maybe, familiarity reasons. And then I think, as Ravi pointed out, there is a reality, which is there are legacy applications, and you're going to end up with hybrid at the very least. So there are probably applications that sometimes you can't move off where you are, a local premises because of either performance or latency requirements, or in some cases you have data sovereignty or compliance that you can't move it off, and so you're stuck. I think the reality is you're stuck with multiple locations, and I don't think the problem goes away. In fact, I think as the survey shows, the trend goes up, right? And so it's nice to have containers as a nice abstraction. But I think even beyond that there are still other elements, right? So let's maybe explore the next one, which is this abstraction and this app portability, right? And so we talked a little bit about it earlier. Henrik talked about using GitOps and some of that abstraction, right, in terms of distributed infrastructure, keeping the same workflow. But how do companies enable this portability and this abstraction of pretty much complex infrastructure? And are there, is it free? Is the portability free? I just moved to Kubernetes, which has a cost, right? But I just moved to Kubernetes and it's magically I get abstraction, right? Is it magic? And then maybe, from the expert's view here, right, what are some of the architectural approaches that we can use to aggregate this distributed infrastructure? And, as we do that, certainly, there's always that term that we hear about lock-in, right? And the reality is, if you look at the survey data, there is lock-in concern. There's always going to be lock-in concern. That's the reality. 61% of them say lock-in. And yet, what we see in the data is, interestingly enough, yes, I'm afraid of lock-in, but here I'm going to go straight into EKS. I'm afraid of lock-in, but here I'm going to go and run on GKE, right? And so, I guess you're facing your fear head on by jumping right in. I know that's a great strategy, but let's see what the expert says here in terms of, what are the strategies for creating app portability, and how do you abstract that infrastructure underlying it to give you the portability, and avoid lock-in? So maybe Ravi, you've run pretty large clusters across multiple clouds, right? What do you and your team do?
Yeah, so the vendor lock-in was always a challenge. Having worked on previous platform as a service vendors, right, like Cloud Foundry and those kind of things, the vendor lock-in was a huge constraint for us to run the business, right? To meet the business objectives, the technology platform had constraints like this. So my strategy was to kind of build it from the basic building blocks, and what we call as container-based PaaS, and stick to open source, right? But we all know that we acknowledge the open source comes with its own challenges, right? In the early evolution of open source, as it continues to mature, there's going to be a lot of releases, updates, patches, a whole bunch of things. And on top of it, and if you go with a particular vendor, there'll be their own flavor added into the open source. So the strategy for me was to stick to as close as possible to the open source. At the same time, get the level of support and validation and verification of new releases from companies like Platform 9. So it was an obvious choice for us to solve that problem and still attain our business objectives, right? We are not in the business of building kind of container software, right? We are in a whole different industry. The business is based on either the product based on different areas and verticals. So core competency is there. So the focus on open source software, work and align and collaborate with companies like Platform 9 to get us going on the container-based framework that we can deploy in 6 months to 9 months, right? On top of the vendor lock-in, you also have resource challenges, which we can talk about it later, how you get the skill sets and the mindset behind it. But the vendor lock-in, it's a thin ice. So you got to balance your investment with a partner like Platform 9, which is very efficient and effective in getting you to attain your outcomes and goals and objectives in a short period of time. And that's how we addressed it. And at the same time, we have matured over the last 2 years almost and continue to build a lot of things, a lot of features and functionality to fund like monitoring, logging, and a whole bunch of integrations and things that we needed to do. And we have achieved a lot over time. And at any point in time, again, this helps us to kind of be more flexible architecture, and that is malleable, and that we can adapt as the business outcomes change. And we have been able to extend it, and now we can run on any cloud, let it be a hybrid or on-prem or public cloud. It is the same thing, and we don't have to worry about any vendor-induced flavors into any of these frameworks.
Got it. I think that's very fair, right? Again, I think if I could sort of summarize what I heard, which I think were very important takeaways. One is, keep as close to the generic, Kubernetes as possible. So open source, don't try to get into specialized flavors unnecessarily, or buy into vendors provided services, because that reduces your ability to be portable. And then 2 is focus on the augmenting that with ancillary services, logging and other services that you manage and you control to some extent, so that you can move that across different clouds, different platforms, hybrid or public, private and public, right? So hybrid, and then I would say then the other element is is to be able to find a way to get the management, and we'll talk a little bit of patching and all these things, right? It's sort of, that's not necessarily, as you said, not the core competence, but find a partner that you trust to be able to handle that for you on an ongoing basis. I think that that's and I think as part of that workflow, part of that, I think Henrik's GitOps, right? Buying the GitOps, gives you scalability across clouds, right? You can use Argo. I'll just say Argo. I won't say the other names of the other ones, but you can use Argo across the rest. I'll leave it to Henrik.
Feel free to do.
Yeah, that's okay. Jenkins next. Okay, I didn't say that. So, and whatever, right? You can use other versions of that, right? But Henrik, anything you want to add to that, or Johnny?
Yeah. Just quickly on the open source side, because I've been involved in open source since I started using Linux back in the mid-90s. It's been a long journey, and one thing that you often hear is that people like, I'm going to go open source, I don't have to worry about vendor lock-in. But what a lot of people don't realize is that open source can actually put you in a worse lock-in than if you go with a vendor. Because if you pick an open source project that's maybe backed by a few individuals or a single company, and they abandon that project, you're actually in a worse situation than you would be if you bought something from a vendor. Because if a vendor shuts something down, they usually give you a way to migrate off of it. Whereas a group of people decide, I'm not going to support this open source project anymore.
That's fair.
You're kind of screwed, right? So it's really important when you do look at these open source projects that you want to pull in to become lock-in free, that they're well-supported projects and a diverse community and something that's going to be in there for a long run. Because over the course of my 25 plus years in open source, and I've seen a lot of open source projects come and go. So it's really important to take that into account and making sure you don't end up in a worse situation than you would be by going with a vendor.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. Agreed. And that excellent point. Like open source does not mean no lock-in, right? There's always switching costs. I mean, I think that's a reality. There's always switching costs no matter what you do. You just got to be smart about it. Speaking of being smart about it, let's talk about some of the elements, right? Which is that it's not just the base Kubernetes itself, but it's the manageability and the other elements around it, right? So let's look at some of the concerns in the survey. It highlighted a need for consistent management across multiple clusters and clouds, which we understand now because you have multiple locations of deployment. We just talked about that. But also a need for high availability, right? They worry about, yes, Kubernetes can be reliable if implemented the right way and configured the right way. Doesn't mean it's automatically reliable. As well, there's some cost optimization. And then beyond that, there's been some complaints that sometimes it's hard to troubleshoot Kubernetes and containers, right? And so, in fact, 91% of the participants had concerns that were focused around day two operations, right, and security. And so I'm going to ask the panel, right, what are some of the emerging cloud native and automated ways of addressing these issues, especially at scale? And let's start with Madhura. What do you think?
Yeah, so, Henrik was talking about the GitOps topic, which I think, by the way, is front and center, right? Specifically, when we talk about the concern that Roy, you're talking about, right? Which is the organizations that were some of the early adopters of Kubernetes, for example, that, started with the Kubernetes journey in, say, 2019 or even a little bit before that. They've reached a point now where they are mature in their Kubernetes deployment. And what that means is that they have multiple applications across multiple teams in their company that are running on containers and Kubernetes. At times, they're deploying their customer-facing applications packaged in a way where their customers can run them on Kubernetes as well. So what all that means is that at any given point, there are probably various flavors of Kubernetes running in a single enterprise, right? And that's happening very commonly.
Yep.
And when that happens, it means some of them are going to be running on AWS EKS, some of them running on Amazon, but maybe just on KOps, some on your private infrastructure, and some on some KubeADM clusters that someone is just running locally, right? So with all of that diversity, one of the most common challenge or problem that comes up, which is there a notion of a consistent definition of your cluster and your applications and your infrastructure, right? And it may not always be necessary, but when it does become necessary is when you're deploying a version of a cluster and an app that depends on that cluster being configured a certain way in your dev test environments as developers, and then you're giving that to your field team to be deployed in front of your customers. And if there's a variance there, that can have a major impact on your end customer, right? So that's where that need for consistently, and it was very interesting that in the survey, one of the top concerns, Roy, that you mentioned, in this context came up to be, how do I manage my environments consistently?
Yeah.
I think the best way to do this is to extend what, Henrik said, using the principles of GitOps and using initiatives like CAPI, the Cluster API project, which enables you to manage clusters at scale with a declarative API, very similar to Kubernetes. And so kind of marrying the two of them and coming up with a model where you can stamp out clusters almost like cattle, right? At any given moment, or you can destroy them and recreate them. And you can then enforce policies that make sure that you have some level of consistency of cluster deployment across the organization. And if there are deviances, you're able to catch them. So I think that's an important aspect of being able to manage things consistently.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think at scale, I think what we realize is that, at scale, you have to do declarative. You have to decide, template wise, what your strategy is and what your configuration ought to be, right? Regardless of what the underlying is, right? And to be able to codify that, and config as config and infrastructure as code in a sense, right? And so the cattle or the shape of your ranch as code, right? So to speak, right? You deploy the same ranch everywhere, so the cows know what to do, right? Not that, but probably bad analogy. But regardless, I think that's an important strategy, right? The consistency is very important. The abstraction above the underlying clusters is important, and to pick the right APIs and the right standards that are going to be probably supported across all the different clouds. I think that's very important, because having CAS as an abstraction layer, a containers as a service, is helpful, but only if that is in fact standardized across all whatever it is that you're trying to run, right? And so, any other thoughts that we want to discuss around how do we keep that operational consistency across multiple clusters, or any other points that we want to make?
I think you touched upon the security. I think there's never going to be a software that's going to address everything you talk about security.
Yeah.
It's really it's a responsibility and accountability of the person who's designing and architecting the solutions to ensure that the controls and the hardening and everything, including the vulnerability analysis, everything is all in place, right? And that's the key, including cloud, Kubernetes, whatever you take from that perspective.
Yes.
And from the perspective of approach of consistency that Madhura brought up, I think it's a matter of approaching how you design, architect, and implement it, right?
Yes.
You start with an MVP, minimal viable product, and then you start releasing those features and functionality and have a long-term flexible architecture and user consistency in place and management perspective.
Correct. And I would say, yes, I completely agree. And I think the discipline for the team, I think what I found, the discipline of the team to always go back to check everything in, to start with configuration and templates, and not go in there and manually, let me just fix this problem one time, right? I mean, I've been there, right? There's a scale, not repeatable, right? And regardless, and especially across multiple clouds, that's even worse, right? And I think that's important, right? Too, which is why GitOps is an important part of it, as we just said, right?
Right. I wanted to chime in real quick here.
Yes,
one of the interviewees, I was talking to a number of these folks that did the survey. Large bank, multinational bank, diversified, multiple data centers, and this person I was speaking to was a DevSecOps engineer, right? I asked him about security and DevOps automation, and he said there's no way you can have a bunch of DevOps SecOps engineers if you don't have a shared platform to begin with. You cannot automate consistently if you have different silos of infrastructure. Then you're back to square one.
Yeah.
So he said that they spent almost 2.5 years building a self-service shared platform. And I thought that was very interesting, because I think that's a key element, like foundational element. In order for you to do these things we're talking about, you need to have that foundational element in place. So just wanted to
I think that's a great idea, because herding cats afterthought really won't work. You gotta really have a shared services team, shared cloud team, or so that way you leverage all the microservices that you designed. You can reuse it and ensure that it's used many times. You write once, and at the same time, including the code, the containerization, or the design and the architecture. That's very important. Shared services approach is very key. Otherwise, herding cats will be a nightmare later.
Yeah, no, I think that.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
And we've gone through that journey, like I said, right? We're right now in a position where we have 15,000 nodes and 400 Kubernetes clusters on the public cloud, going from everything in a data center, and that shared experience with the platform team, I think, is one of the key themes. Like we already mentioned here too, that we had. Instead of forcing teams to migrate, we had teams begging to get on the new platform. So, like the fact that we built that experience, and instead of, because we've all tried to roll out things and try to get people to migrate, and it's always a little carrot and a stick, right? But here's like people are begging us, can we please get on the platform? And that's a lot of that is to thank the platform team for, right? We have a big platform team. We built a lot of that experience to help them onboard. So I think that's really, really crucial here.
Yep. No, I think that's an excellent point. I think that the shared platform, the shared source of truth, one source of truth, I think it reduces a lot of complexity, right? I mean, I think that's key, and so we'll probably see the the DevSec NetOps platform, right? Which I think that's a reality, right? Infrastructure as code, right? I mean, because then you can validate it. You can it's one integrated, validated, right? And you can assure it, right? I think, and monitor it and check for drift. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to doing all these things, but let's we'll keep moving. I think the next one is pretty interesting, which is the next one here I want to highlight is the rising importance of this hybrid and on-premises, and we saw that in the 16% edge, right? So even as we're going out on the public cloud and we're saying centralized, right? The survey says that 60%, 67% actually of the deployments are still on-premises in private data centers and the edge, and so we wanted to see if maybe Johnny could provide some insight, given the work he's done and the people he's been talking to, what workloads are driving this, and what are some of the strategies for hybrid deployments, especially as companies, are moving their workloads to the public clouds, but still having, I think there's two things: moving workloads to public clouds, moving workloads out of public clouds in the edge, right, simultaneously, and how should that impact the container management strategy? So Johnny, any insights you can share with us?
Absolutely. So I'll take two different use cases and two different workloads. So Kubernetes is a new operating system. At the risk of sounding cliche, I think this is becoming a reality. So Kubernetes is the new operating system, and it is bringing a level of portability, and it has become the vehicle for hybrid cloud. I know Platform 9 as a company that kind of pioneered the SaaS control plane and extending Kubernetes to on-premises, but now that has become the new norm. We are seeing almost every hyperscaler extend their managed Kubernetes to on-premises. But when we actually double-click and check on why Kubernetes needs to be extended to the on-prem or hybrid environment, the number one goal is data sovereignty and keeping compute close to data. So there is a lot of emphasis on app modernization. There is a lot of investment that's currently going on in the digital transformation and app modernization domains. But what is more important is there is a lot of data that is siloed inside legacy Oracle databases, legacy SQL servers, and even mainframes. While applications are getting modernized, the data is not going to be going anywhere. It is going to be there where it actually originated from. While the applications are getting modernized and delivering new experiences, there is the system of intelligence that is coming in. So there is system of records, which is locked inside data warehouses and databases. There is systems of engagement, which is app modernization and becoming the front end for the new users. Then there is systems of intelligence, which is bringing in machine learning and analytics. Now that also is going to be running on top of Kubernetes. So obviously Kubernetes is becoming the vehicle, the fabric, where it is going to run both modern applications as well as the systems of intelligence code, which is essentially machine learning. So as more and more analytics and machine learning workloads come in, Kubernetes is going to be the preferred platform to run those modern workloads. That is the biggest driver for hybrid. Now, when it comes to edge, it's a very, very different ballgame and a very different approach. So I have been advising a very well-known household name, which is a quick serve chain of restaurants, QSR, and they wanted to run their AIoT, which is artificial intelligence plus IoT workloads. And they started with VMs. The original plan was to run KVM and a set of virtual machines. And very quickly they realized they're not going to get the agility that they require. First thing, what happens if a VM dies? Will it automatically come back? Nope, not really. But when you switch to Kubernetes, you get that. Pods are resilient, applications are resilient, they are self-healing. So one checkbox that is clicked. Second thing is the agility factor. So the whole world is moving to CI/CD, and we want to ship software at a much rapid pace. So cooking a VM, building an image, and pushing it to 30,000 plus locations where this restaurant chain operates is impossible. Now with images, container images, you build it once and you push it seamlessly through the container registry, you achieve that kind of agility. And add Hendrik's favorite GitOps to it, you manage it at scale. And yes, we are evaluating Argo CD to actually perform this. And the best thing is with Kubernetes running at the edge in these restaurants, they're treating it like a set-top box. It is like a customer premises equipment, which the restaurant doesn't even know about. It actually runs Kubernetes like firmware. It runs the applications as another layer. And there is an over-the-air deployment of these container images and applications and AI models that are actually deployed at a much rapid pace. And the most interesting thing is with virtual machines, we have seen customers do blue-green deployments and canary releases and so on. But with Kubernetes at the edge, I'm actually seeing customers do very innovative ways of blue-green deployment. For example, can I run V2 across all the West Coast restaurants while running version 1.5 in East Coast? And can I look at the observability data and gradually move the needle to move all my restaurants from 1.5 to 2? So it is blue-green deployment, not at the version level, at the cluster level, but at the regional level. Now imagine a version of an application and an ML model running in a specific region that matches a specific criteria, and someone is closely monitoring the performance and the accuracy of the models. And as and when it passes a specific threshold, it gets gradually rolled out, and the heat map goes from yellow to orange to green in a matter of hours. And that is the agility that the customers get when they actually adopt Kubernetes for the edge, combined with GitOps and the CI/CD capabilities. So to summarize, hybrid, it is app modernization, data sovereignty, bringing compute close to data is what is driving hybrid on-prem in the data centers. Edge is all about bringing the agility of cloud all the way to the last mile, to the edge, and treating edge like a mini cloud. It's like a mini cloud zone, but treating it like a black box, almost bringing the concept of set-top box running Kubernetes to the last mile deployment.
Yeah, no, I think that those are excellent points, and I like the way you describe it with real examples in terms of what's happening in the edge use case. And I would say that the experience I've had mirrors that a lot. Been working with some of the large tier 1 carriers, looking at edge deployments, slightly different workloads, but same problem. So same exact challenges, right? You have hundreds of locations or thousands of locations, and trying to push essentially new, just say, network functions, serving networks across these locations, and VMs are very heavyweight and challenging. And so when you want CI/CD and you want to do a build and push or on a regular basis, it's very hard, right? Whereas the container ecosystem is built for that and exactly that purpose. And roll forward, roll back, checkpointing, it's all in there, and the mindset's there, the tools are there, the tool chain and the whole pipeline is built that way. And so if you want modern development, modern app development, there's no reason to go back to an old packaging solution that doesn't really meet your need. Plus, it's extra overhead and it's unnecessary. And so, absolutely, I think that's definitely. And the same thing, you're right. The data is not just data gravity, but the reality is that data cannot move from a location for performance reasons. We're seeing some of those situations, or for compliance reasons. And you want to bring the app and the logic and the intelligence to the location. And the container abstraction is one that does it very well, right? And so I'm seeing that as well. And anything to add, Madhura? Anything you wanted to?
Yeah, just, one interesting pattern in that context of, edge deployments that Johnny was talking about. One of the things that we see that I find interesting is that, historically, the VM workloads have been completely separate from the container workloads, and VMs run on a virtualization or infrastructure as a service platform. But specifically at these edge locations, there are multiple patterns. Retailers are one example, telco are another, where certain portions of those workloads that need to run at edge still need to run in a VM. For example, your point of sale software just may not be able to run in container, or certain VNFs or network functions must run in VM still.
That's correct.
However, because the hardware at the edge location is restricted, you probably have a couple of Dell or HP servers with some limited network configuration. You don't have the luxury to run two separate frameworks or stacks, one to run VMs and one to run containers. And so that's where being able to use Kubeboard, for example, to run VMs using Kubernetes, so you can consolidate on a single stack, or potentially when you use Metal Cube, so you can run the bare metal servers and get them up and running using Kubernetes as well, can become a very powerful optimization, and something that I really encourage the listeners of this webinar to look into. If you have these edge deployments and you're looking for end-to-end automation, every part of the stack can be automated using Kubernetes.
Agreed, and I would second you on that one. Some of the telcos we've been working with historically, the way we would have advised them, and in the past, and you guys know this better than I do, is OpenStack and then container inside a VM on OpenStack originally, right?
That's right.
And I would say about probably 2 years to 18 months, about 2 years ago, that switched because KubeVirt became sufficiently mature about 18 months or 2 years ago. I would say that our advice switched, right? Which is now you reverse the relationship with you wrap that VM, which is becoming less and less, right, on the container, because the pipeline and the management system for the container scales a lot better, much more efficiently than the historical, which still exists, the OpenStack and sort of the VM-centric workflow, right? So we saw that, and that's a really good point. And KubeVirt has been a big, I would say, let's just say in a lot of telco workloads with VNS, and now Ravi will see this as well, right? That is actually a good solution now, right? So excellent. All right.
I just want to sum up by saying just one thing.
Yes, Johnny. Yes.
So on the edge, there are two very important pillars. The one is meta control plane. Kubernetes itself has a control plane, but that's going to run close to the edge. So we need a meta control plane, which Platform 9 calls as the SaaS-like control plane. That is going to spawn the clusters and manage the lifecycle of clusters. Yes. And the next pillar is the GitOps pillar with Flux or Go. So with the SaaS control plane, you bootstrap a cluster, and the cluster will call home, pulls all these centrally located artifacts, manage it through GitOps, and it will bootstrap itself and brings itself to a state that is ready for the business. I think the SaaS control plane combined with a GitOps engine is a killer combination for edge management.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Very good point, which is the edge bootstrap problem, and that solves it. And it's not just the bootstrap, but the ongoing day-to maintenance of that underlying infrastructure, right? Historic in telco, we call it NFVI or the Vim layer, right? That self-management of it and the patching of it, that's very, very critical. So that brings us to the last point before we get into, I think we've actually had a wonderful discussion here. And so one more thing, which is actually really critical, especially in companies that say, okay, all this is great, I like containers and all wonderful, but staffing. There are issues with staffing, as we know. Hiring is one of the challenges. It's been getting worse. So what are strategies to mitigate staffing shortages, especially across DevOps, cloud platform engineering, right? What's the difference between the SRE and the DevOps role? And how do you build that team, right? And can you still do it all yourself, right? I mean, Kubernetes is great, but I know we've heard about, Ravi's use of Platform 9, right, to basically have them focus on the parts that the team doesn't really need to, right, because it's not core to Juniper, for instance, and then just focus on using the platform itself, right? So is that a viable strategy from a staffing perspective? So Ravi, what are your thoughts around staffing? Especially, it's hard to hire. I know cloud architects make a lot of money today.
Well, the thing is, anything can be built in-house, but will you meet the business outcomes and the timeline? Yep. That is a challenge. I think typical technology people sometimes miss that. They want to build everything in-house, take a long time, delivery, all kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. So the executives needs to focus on, technology executives needs to focus on, when can I get this thing launched and make that whatever investment be productive and have some outcomes and ROI on it. So given that, the last thing I want to do is to go hire some 12 people for SREs around the clock, another few more in the DevOps. SREs are essential for a proactive perspective, focusing on capacity planning, tuning, and ensuring the incidents don't happen and there's no downtime impacting customers, and keeping up a high level of SLAs, while the DevOps guys are focused on core deployment, continuous integration, continuous deployment, pipeline automation, right? So those two are two distinct, but they are kind of supplementing each other and complementing it, right? So given that, I think the wise decision somebody needs to make is, hey, let's get this business outcomes achieved. That is the first priority. And how you achieve it is through a managed services for now. And last thing you want to do is hire people, wait for 6 months, and then that person leaves and retention is a challenge. You lost all the time you had, and starting from fresh is always difficult. So the best thing is talk to vendors like Platform 9,
Sure.
right? And you get there faster, quicker, mature faster, get the business outcomes, then you figure out the strategy over time, probably over a couple of years and years, you go start building up your bench strength.
Yep.
Right. I started with only 1 or 2 resources. That's all I had. There's no way, it's impossible to get what I had to achieve. So the best approach for me to look at my core competency and where I need to focus on, and get what I need to partner with, whom I need to partner with, and get the outcomes achieved. And that was my focus, and that's what I kind of got where I am today. And I don't regret on those decisions, and it's been very successful perspective from that perspective in achieving the outcomes and the results that we wanted to see.
Yep.
And that's where it is.
Yep. No, I think that's a very good point. I think, you're looking at the end of the day for the business outcome, because that's what's important.
Yeah.
And then you work backward from there, and you figure out what's competency that's important and valuable and differentiated, and what it is that you can outsource, and the cost of the outsourcing. And you could it's just a cost comparison, right? In essence, right? And I think, and that made a lot of sense for you. I have an audience question here I'm going to fold in as a follow on to you, Ravi, which is that, given the ongoing pandemic and, the remote work, has that changed the way that you look at your staffing and your investment in terms of your cloud infrastructure strategies?
Question for Ravi.
Ravi, sorry.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Oh,
sorry.
From that perspective, the staffing, hiring in a virtual world, the way we are working during pandemic is all a big challenge, right? If you're not building bench strength during this time is very difficult, right? On top of it, and you don't get to see the person in person. You don't have this management in terms of day-to-day management or working through. You only work through OKRs, right? All those deliverables are all now based on trust, right?
That's true.
So the outcome is not known till that is achieved or delivered. So from my perspective, that's a big change for any business today. And I think partnering and trusting with companies like Platform 9, who has already proven the managed services work, and they have made many companies successful, and they bring that experience into the game, is the best foot forward to achieve your business outcomes. Right? If you want an outcome that is successful, you got to partner with somebody like Platform 9 to achieve your outcomes. But if you want to build with a lot of uncertainty, manage the risk of hiring and waiting on it, hoping that the skill set and the person that brings the talent has everything that you need to deliver it, that's a long pole. So
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? During the pandemic, we all relied on services that were there, that were scalable, right? That we could, and that's part of why a lot of cloud-based companies took off and grew a lot more in the pandemic. And I think your point is that, the managed services, that has strong economies of scale, right? Which is what Platform 9 can provide, right? I think that definitely helped, because, that expertise can scale quite well in the way that they deploy it.
That's right.
Thank you, Ravi.
Plus, it's a proven platform,
It is.
and
Yes.
And it's a lot of companies have successfully deployed their business apps and gotten outcomes out of it. So it is not something that you have to experiment, or you got to do like a proof of concept or a pilot. I think you'll achieve your outcomes and get going on it.
Agreed. No, I think that's.
And I think that. I think the key is finding what works for you, right? Like I said, we've gone through a very successful platform, evolution, and but we didn't build it all ourselves. We built some of it ourselves. We have a public cloud provider that provides the container platform underneath, but we built a GitOps layer on top of it, because that made sense to us. Yes. And also because that also loops back into what ties into some of the other things we talked about, where the Argo team that runs our Argo platform, they're Argo engineers. We don't even call them DevOps. So they're still, they build Argo, but they're still responsible for making sure that Argo runs. I mean, we don't even really call them DevOps. I mean, they're Argo engineers with PagerDuty duties, right? So it's part of that. And that helps us build and avoid some of the lock-in because they know the product. If something goes wrong, we don't need to go to a different vendor to get help. We have the engineers to fix it. And then that's just to wrap it up. That's also one thing that kind of helps in hiring because they get to work on open source, which a lot of engineers enjoy. You have a community to hire from. So actively engaging in open source and hiring people from open source community kind of helps with finding good talent and helps retention as well as building the internal muscles.
Right. No, I think that makes sense too, right? I mean, to the extent that that there are specific elements that you need in a open source platform, and that's either proprietary to you or you think you're on the cutting edge of, then definitely I think that makes a lot of sense. And then if there are other elements, I think as Henrik says, it's a blended strategy, right? If there are other elements that are not strategic or important to you, and you can find someone that can offload that for you in a scalable way, in a trustworthy way, then definitely, right? I think that makes a lot of sense as well. And I think that blended strategy is one that we'll have to take a look at and figure out what the business outcomes are and work backwards from there. But I think, one of the things I would say is that we have only a couple of minutes here. I'm going to ask one other question here, which is about a couple of observability questions, right? So any guidance on observability, because it seems like a big issue across multiple locations and multiple deployments. And any of the panelists, feel free to jump in here in terms of observability.
Observability is a huge win, right? Yeah, in the sense that you want to now start tracking the application performance management, monitoring, logging, right? In terms of performance that impacts customers, right? If you're doing a SaaS to customers, your products better have APM built into your DevOps food chain, right?
Yes.
So, and this is part of the Platform 9's offering is it comes with the observability part of it, which is based on Prometheus and Grafana and their own monitoring team with the incident management and alerting, all kinds of things that comes with it. From a Kubernetes layer perspective, then you don't have to invest anything on that because somebody else is handling it.
Right. I think that's fair, right? It's observability and visibility into what's happening, troubleshooting at the platform layer, right? And all the way up to the app layer. And the app layer is your responsibility for figuring it out. And, if something, like service mesh, service meshes, fits the boat, do that. But on the app level itself, putting in observability, tracing, whatever it is that you need, right, to figure out what that's important. But on the underlying platform layer, make sure that you pick a platform that has that built in and with that mindset built in so that if something goes wrong, you can figure out, and something will go wrong, that, but you got to find it quickly and fix it, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. So at this point,
one quick thing I would add, just Roy, to that is that, no matter what solution you're investing in, especially if you're deploying your clusters, etc., across multiple endpoints for something like monitoring observability, inserting that lower tier tool like an open source Prometheus or a FluentBit or FluentD in each cluster and standardizing on that pattern is very critical, because then all of your apps, all of your custom resources can send their metrics in that standardized way to that agent, and then that can forward all the data to a central logging solution, a monitoring solution that simplifies a lot of observability challenges. So I think simple patterns, but I think that work well.
Yeah, no, agree.
And that's exactly what we've done at Intuit too. We just have a big data lake that just collects business metrics, infrastructure metrics, everything, and then we can put whatever tools, whatever solution on top of it, but we have all the data and we can reuse that for progressive delivery, reporting, whatever it may be. But like we just said, like having that standardized layer that puts all the data in there is critical.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's consistent with having a standardized approach to deploying, your container platforms across multiple locations and managing that as well, right? And the same security models, same declarative, templates in terms of how you deploy the applications, right? Configuration. I think consistency, simplicity reduces mistakes, right? Makes it much faster to troubleshoot and gives you the business portability, right? From a strategic standpoint, where you can move around as you see fit. So I think. We're at the top of the hour. I think this was an excellent discussion. I definitely learned a lot about all the different practices and best practices out there, from the edge to the data center. So want to thank again the panelists. Thank you Ravi, thank you Johnny, thank you Henrik and Madhura and Kamesh for letting me participate in this, and thank you to the audience.
We have a prize. Let me announce the prize winner. Let's see if he's still here. His name is Vishal Parikh from Express. Vishal, if you're here, congratulations. For those who you don't know, Express Inc. is an American fashion retailer that caters mainly to young women and men. So he works for a retail company.
Just like
so
you,
Vishal,
just like
yeah,
me.
just like me. Yeah, exactly. Vishal, congrats. And again, thanks everyone. This has been an excellent webinar. Got some really good positive comments here, very insightful discussion. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And, I look forward to doing more of this in the future.
And Roy,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Glad to be of service, and very nice. I would say wonderful panel. I think a lot of insights, a lot of real discussion. So excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks
Have a
to
great
everyone.
rest of the week. Take care.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you all soon. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.